Hello, and before I begin talking about Whitehead, I wanted to sadly report that I've lost access to my main YouTube account, Bongo, and so until further notice, I'll be posting on Bongo Posting or Bongo Poster, um, and if it changes and we can get it back, then obviously I'll re-upload all these Whitehead videos there, but the show must go on, so we're going to do that. Um, and so, if we're going to start with Whitehead, um, just like with all the other thinkers, I guess we'll start with influences and kind of look at their lives. Um, Whitehead has a huge influence later in the 20th century with relativity and his process theology as well. People will be interested in that if they look through these videos. And so, if we want to go from his departure from idealism to what Whitehead is objectively trying to do, then we consider the evolutionary and biological process, the dialectics, if you will, that Hegel's philosophy talks of the creative spirit and its changing process, um, um, and so then of course you have out of that the historical moves and process out of that Hegelian history, whereas Whitehead wants to depart with idealism, even though they come at it in a very similar way through process metaphysics. And so one of the handoffs and why he goes at mechanistic science so rigorously is to encapsulate the substance metaphysics to the process metaphysics. And what is the process of changing the logos, if you will, that Hegel pointed out. That sort of process isn't what changes. It's the logos structure, the elements, becoming. Those things change, but the actual process itself, the formula, if you will, that is unchanging. It's sort of the Western way of looking at being in the kind of form. And Whitehead, of course, is very influenced by Middle Platonists, and he is very indebted to Plato in general because of that. And so he wants to take, obviously, the Hegelian logos, the structure and orderedness of the world, and describe that experience, if you will. So the process isn't just it isn't a mechanistic, individual, pellet of observable matter like in the 18th century, but a sort of model of growth in the process, and the interactions between those ingredients and those relationships. That is really getting to Whitehead's discussions of relativity, and the changes in science in his time towards relative theory. And so Whitehead's parting with idealism and transferring into a evolutionary naturalist mindset. So Whitehead, he's agreeing that substance qualities, these mechanistic abstractions, they even modern physics will make space and time an abstraction even. And so Whitehead, in his influence, he takes from actually Bradley, English Hegelian, that there's varying degrees of realness towards appearances, and so there's varying degrees towards how real things are in nature, as he wants to point out that nature has value in this sort of being and hierarchy into the structure. And obviously, Whitehead, being a famous mathematician, formal logic and mathematical symbolism, one of his life accomplishments was trying to take mathematical symbolism and making deductive logic out of it, towards and taking mathematics and going towards a philosophy of science. One of the things, as a kind of an aside here, that's interesting about Whitehead is to see how he goes across all these different disciplines and takes U-turns. He was into theology when he was younger, thought he couldn't really do it, wasn't very interested into it, got into mathematics with Bertrand Russell, makes deductive systems into a sort of philosophy of science, and sees the sort of values within nature and weaves it into a metaphysical system. It's quite admirable to observe and take a look at. One of the interesting things to consider is, despite talking about describing him as this mathematician, is his romance of process of as a whole. He invokes a lot of poetry. There's a lot of poeticism to his works, actually, and it's kind of interesting to consider that. And so one of the shifts, obviously, with his philosophy of science is electromagnetic field theory, and force fields now kind of being the unit, as opposed to pellets of and atoms and the mechanistic form that was prior. The basic unit really is towards energy, which is kind of funny if you consider how far back Leibniz was talking about things like energy. And so, continuing outlining distinctions between Whitehead's philosophy, Whitehead has a scientific realism as opposed to the phenomenalist view of science, that we can observe, through science, the telos, if you will, within these laws of nature, and its beauty even. And so for Whitehead, philosophy is really just a critique of these abstractions of the scientific world, and a sort of romanticist look at the possibilities that could be interwoven, and the what he calls the flights of speculative imagination. And he has an interesting way of describing airplane travel, because this was obviously in his time cutting edge. I think there's an interesting commentary here towards the Western tradition of perspective, of new heights, of trying to find a perspectivity, the ultimate reality, as Whitehead would describe, above the clouds. I think those metaphors are purposeful in the West's tradition, and that sort of trying to get the perspective, the abstractions, or even the concreteness. Whitehead has, obviously one of the fireworks shows within Whitehead is, these abstractions of qualities of, something like substance, even space and time, as it turns out. These are ultimately scientific abstractions, but these can't, get at, potentiality, possibility. So for Whitehead, a relationship with science revolves around, experience that can be phenomenologically described through self-conscious introspection. It's not, intellectual abstraction that has concreteness, but the experience is described through that introspection. And some of the fallacies that he talks about, he loves to talk about fallacies, is the fallacy of location, which we've brushed up on, which is his critique of Newtonian physics of location that doesn't account for the motion and how the coordinates will change relative to those spatial relationships, and so you can't have a fixed location if everything's in motion, as he'd point out. And one of the things I also think is interesting to divert here is how the relationship of mathematicians really admiring Platonism, and it's kind of interesting to see how the logos structure towards people who are into mathematics. Spangler says good philosophy requires mathematics, and for Whitehead, his interest is the origin of the good, as the Platonists would describe, that transfers out into particular things. And so that order, that structure, the process, of course, there's the possibility of goodness within nature out of these possible things from events. So for Whitehead, the ultimate reality is this creative process, the different processes that could come out of and the emergence of novelty. But you can't just computate that through substance observation. These are possibilities within us, with in a creative capacity. And so Whitehead, he's so hard to pin down with his conception of what actually God really is. But to put it bluntly, it's the logos, the highest manifestation, the ultimate reality. It's the closest to get to actual knowledge of all of the processes of possibility to come out. And for Whitehead, his starting point, of course, just like Hegel and the phenomenology of mind, as you would expect from many philosophers, and as I've pointed out problematically with the 21st century and sense perception. But his starting point is obviously the experience of our sense perception. And so his perception of modes, as it were, is threefold. The mode of causal efficacy, what is causing the loud noise at 8 o'clock in the morning. Is it a phone call, or is it my alarm on my phone? You have the possibilities, ruminating in your mind. And so for 2, the mode of presentational immediacy, this is, kind of really a critique of, the intellectual abstraction that we mentioned earlier, of presentations or ideas that they're not just out there and then they come to us, but they're really more of a symbolic reference, which is his third. And so for Whitehead, knowledge of reality is an indirect. It's always indirect and then logically deduced. But we do actually have. He takes a step further though and say that we do have the direct knowledge of being able to feel causality. What is the stimulus? We can have a direct knowledge of of the existence of a real object of force, of the rain outside today. If I stand out in it, I definitely have an awareness of those raindrops. But we don't necessarily always have the right symbols, or as Hume and Locke got misguided on in those presentations of causal efficacy. Ideas for Whitehead are symbols and not copies, or direct copies of. And so indirect knowledge then is the essence of an object. It's kind of a scheme of what it is in existence that it is. And then there's the direct awareness of what it is, and the indirectness of that it is. And so for Whitehead, we do have an objective givenness that will affect, the thoughts, the hypotheticals, that we think about. This is the objective data, the baseline, if you will, of these, the stimulus that gives us the possibilities and hypotheticals, just like we mentioned earlier with the volume, loudness, the rainfall that you feel. There's a possibility that it wasn't going to rain at all today, but just like typical of spring weather, rain just kind of develops by chance from the atmosphere, and that was always a possibility, just like it was possible that it was going to be sunny and 70 today. These were ultimately possibilities that could have happened. But as he would refer to it, the decision was rain. And it's that selection process out of the range of those possibilities proposed out of sense perception. The symbols, it's not so much if they could, you probably won't actually get a one-to-one copy of these ideas, but they could work based off of course, that sort of Bradley idealism of the degreeness of how real it is. The event is that range of possible experience that is cosmically bound to causal efficacy, or the entertainment of possibility towards the mind before the decision, and it's objective causal givens is laden with the process for good or bad within its values. And there's kind of an interesting way of considering life here. He's not going to say obviously anything about something like karma or anything, but consider you want to be around good possibilities. You want to be somewhat of an opportunist towards the good, having good things happen to you, having responsibilities and obligations, good friends. You want to direct yourselves towards the good, as the Platonists would say. Just to round out some of his terminology here, objective data is that space and time that affects the present stream, but the eternal possibilities and thoughts and ideas aren't necessarily bound by substance. They're possibilities out there affected by the entities comprised in the logic of space and time. And so you kind of have that individual stream of decisions, of your own decisions, and this is what he calls satisfaction. It's the reflection upon those stimulus from different events or decisions, and so that's how you come about with the self and its ingredient towards ongoing individual of you as a sort of stream. He doesn't want to obviously have a deterministic view. He cares about freedom. And so individual things are causally related to other individual processes, and so that creates room for his creative possibility that some events ultimately will become actualized into decisions. And this leads into, of course, what we'll talk about in the next video with gradualism as the sort of low-grade analog towards different individual decisions as the cutoff point in which there's certain possibilities that will be assured through gradualism as just sort of the baseline of becoming as a whole. And so this was just a somewhat lengthier video on kind of an introduction for me for Whitehead on this channel, and I hope you guys enjoy and look out for the next one. Thanks for watching.